the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And God separated the light from the darkness. And he saw that the light was good. Then he separated the waters of the earth, creating the skies and seas. The earth brought forth vegetation, and God saw that it was good. And God made two great lights. Then he made the animals. Then he created you.
Through the course of this series, we've been again looking at the two very, very different stories. Two stories about the origin of all things, of everything that came into existence. And one story we see is right there in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness. And it continues on, and it tells us the story of how God speaks each thing into existence. And at the very end of that story, he comes and he tells us the culmination, the highlight of his created work, one that is not spoken like everything else, but that he creates uniquely and specially. Verse 26, "And then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness.'" Nothing else was made in his image in this way. And he said, "Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds in the heavens, birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And so God created man in his own image. And in the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And so we have an incredible story about where everything came from, and specifically where we as humans come from. Now let's contrast that with another story. A story that says, "In the beginning there was nothing. And then from that nothing, this singularity formed, and a small spot in the middle of that nothingness. And suddenly that singularity exploded with great force, an explosion that created all the matter of the universe. And not only created the matter, but organized all that matter perfectly in order and fine-tuned, so that it then organized itself into stars and into galaxies and planets and ultimately into life. Because in this little planet we had, suddenly there was in a little pond, out of that dead planet, suddenly life organized itself and created itself in a single cell, amazingly, spontaneously. And that life somehow then duplicated itself and reproduced and then somehow evolved and changed. And through the course of time, through the impact of natural causes, that single self evolved into all the life that we see, including ourselves. Now, two stories. They're two very, very different stories about where everything comes from. One is true and one is false. One is total fabrication. They both cannot be true, as we've seen. But which one is true? And over the previous weeks, one of the things that we've looked at, if you're visiting, I invite you to go back, and we have these videos that are available. Look and see what we've talked about up till now, because what we'll see in these previous weeks, we've looked deeply into science and how God has revealed himself through science. And what we found is that the evidence of science consistently agrees with and affirms the story of Genesis 1, that God created. And the evidence of science consistently calls into question disagreeing with the teaching of Darwinistic evolution. That it is those who believe in Darwin have a leap of faith that say, I have to believe this in spite of the evidence. Whereas Christians, we look at this and we say all the evidence totally affirms that which we read in Genesis. So we've seen where we come from, but one of the things that we see in the middle of that is that this question is not just about biology, it's not even just about religion or theology. It's something that is in many ways even bigger. The question of creation and evolution is that they are both ultimately comprehensive worldviews. And by that I mean that both of them seek to answer the biggest questions of life. Both of them are trying to answer a question of who we are, where we came from, why we are here, what is the purpose of life, where are we going, what's ultimately. They both try to explain ultimate reality. See, for the evolutionists, the ultimate reality is that matter has existed eternally. And this matter somehow created everything. So everything that we see was the result of organic matter. That's the ultimate reality. For creationists, we say no, that in the beginning there was an all-powerful, self-existent God. And this all-powerful, all-knowing God created and designed all things. God is the ultimate reality. He is the creator of the universe, not organic matter. See, but also it goes even beyond that, because what we believe about these things will literally define our thinking in just about every area of life. You see, if the story of creation is true, then not only are we designed biologically, not only our world is designed biologically, but everything in our world is designed. So we have been designed morally, socially, and ethically. If we are created by God, we are created in His image. We are the highlight of His creative power and work. But on the other hand, if Darwin's theory of evolution is true, then nothing is designed. It's not only that we are the result of chance biologically, but literally everything that we see and experience is the result of chance. There is no design. There is no design or purpose to morality. There is no basis to say something that is right or wrong or good or evil, because there is no ultimate authority above us. There is no ultimate meaning in life, because there's nothing beyond this. And if evolution is true, then what we've got to realize that what it's saying is that we should always be striving to evolve. We should be striving to evolve morally and ethically and trying to grow. But on the other hand, if creation is true, and if everything is designed, then what we have to realize is that as a person and as a culture, we will always be healthiest not by evolving, but by coming back and recognizing that we are designed, and the more that we align ourselves with that design, the healthier we're going to be. And the more that we evolve away from that design, the less healthy we're going to be. Do you see how this is a huge issue? So let's even think about this. When we think of evolution, we've got to see it as something that is a belief system, and it is. It's a belief system. It's not primarily scientific. It's primarily a belief system that people then try to use science to try to support. And it's a belief system that shapes your view of humanity, of morality, and of social structures. Now, to even illustrate this a little bit further, let me not try to just do my own words. Let's take the words of someone who is a strong proponent of evolutionists. This was from a debate a number of years ago, and a guy named Dr. Will Provine. He was a professor at biological studies at Cornell University. He was considered one of the leading experts in evolution. And in this famous debate, is that they were talking about creation, evolution, he stopped and he said, it's just not about this. He said, if this is true, then these are the implications. I'm not just arguing about the biological structure. He then said, okay, these are the implications of what this is true. Now listen to his words.
Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear, and I must say that these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposive forces of any kind. No life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be completely dead. That's going to be the end of me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either. What an unintelligible idea. Christian humanism has a great deal going for it. It's warm, it's kindly in many ways. Maybe not to people who are a little different, but that's all right. If you're gay, it's not so hot for many Christians. But anyway, let's leave that aside and look at the good parts of Christian humanism. The bad part is that you have to suspend your rational mind. And that part is really nasty. Now, atheistic humanism has the advantage of fitting rational minds trying to understand the world, but it has the disadvantage of very little cultural heritage. And that's a real problem. So the question is, can atheistic humanism offer us very much? Well, sure, it can give you intellectual satisfaction. And I'm a heck of a lot more intellectually satisfied now that I don't have to cling to the fairy tales that I believed when I was a kid. So life may have no ultimate meaning, but I sure think it can have lots of proximate meaning. And since we know that we're not going to live after we die, there's no reward for suffering in this world. I mean, you live and then you die.
Here's what he's saying now. I would disagree. Again, intellectually, I think that what we're seeing is that creationism is far more intellectually satisfying. But even beyond that, what you see, what he's acknowledging is that if we embrace the evolutionary perspective, he says there's no gods, there's no purposes, there's no goal-directed forces of any kind. There's nothing beyond this. There's no foundation for morality. So there's no ultimate meaning. And well, we can find, there's no ultimate meaning, well, we can find meaning outside of that. We can have proximate meaning. I don't know what that means, but but there's nothing to life. And what we've got to realize that again is that this is a huge issue because it's not just a matter of biology or science, it's an issue of literally how we view everything in life. And this morning we're going to spend the majority or the rest of our time looking specifically at this question of saying, how does it's a battle of worldviews, what does it mean as our understanding of humanity, of who we are as individuals, about the value of human life, of the idea of even human rights. Because when we think about it, evolution teaches that we are just really the result of natural forces. We're not designed. There's no intentionality behind us. In our evolutionary past, well, we started out as, well, slime, basically. And that's where we started. I mean, that's, you can joke about that, but that's the reality. We started out as organisms in a pond. And somehow we, through the forces of nature and through good luck, we evolved to our present state. And so the primary truth when you think of evolution is that we started from nothing, and how did we get here? Well, it's through survival of the fittest. The strong win out at the expense of the weak. Now let me ask you, what does that teach about the value of human life? If you really believe that, then what is the value of human life? Are there any human rights? And what is the source of human rights? If a person believes in evolution, why do we care for the sick? Why do we care for the needy? Why do we care for the elderly? But on the other hand, the Bible teaches that God created man as the ultimate, the climactic act of his creation. And he made man in his own image, giving him an eternal soul. And that tells us that each person has incredible value and worth. Why? Because we are bearers of God's image. See, ultimately, when we look at this, it's dealing with a vitally important question. And the issue is this: what is the basis of human worth and human rights? We're talking two different world systems, worldviews, and ultimately, do humans have rights? Do humans have value? Why? Are we more valuable than a cow or a dog or a bug? And if so, what makes us valuable? Are there any innate human rights? Or is it something that you just have whoever's in power will decide the rights, and these people have rights and these people don't? And if you have rights, where do they come from? Well, let's first of all look at that question from the perspective of evolution. When you look at evolution, where did we come from? The evolutionary view of humanity is that we're simply the product of chance and of unguided natural causes. Several weeks ago, I used a quote when we were talking about the whole idea of the Big Bang. And I used a quote from a guy named Bill Nye. Some of you might know Bill Nye. He's the other science guy. And so Bill Nye, and I used this quote, and I didn't use all of it. I'm gonna use the rest of it this morning. The quote was from an acceptance speech when he was named in 2010 the Humanist of the Year by the American Humanist Association. And in that speech, here's what he said. Now, at the very end, I'll tell you there's a little bit of editing for language purposes. But here's what he said. He said, "I am totally insignificant. I am just a speck of sand. And the earth is really, in the cosmic scheme of things, another speck, and the sun an unremarkable star. And the galaxy is a speck. I am a speck on a speck orbiting a speck amongst other specks, amongst still other specks in the middle of specklessness, I am totally worthless. Now here's his acceptance of an award. Now I used most of that. We ended here. But here what he's saying, he's not just saying that we're a speck in a speck. He's saying because I am just a speck, I'm worthless. I'm nothing. Here we are in the middle of this incredible, vast universe. We're just on this little tiny speck of earth, and we're just a little tiny speck on that speck that happened by accident. And if evolved, there's no innate value, there's no innate worth. We're just lucky slime. We're a speck on a speck. Why do we have value? There's no reason that we do. Now that's the view of evolution. You've got to understand that that's what they're at the core teaching. And you have to ask, again, when you think of in the schools that you have them teaching this idea of saying, well, here's all you are, you're a speck on a speck, there's no innate value, you're not created, that you're just lucky slime in a sense, and we're teaching that to our children, and then we have children get angry and they take out their anger and go kill their schoolmates, and they have no value of life. Do you think that the fact that we teach them that life has no value might impact the fact that they treat life without value? Let's think about this. What are some of the implications of this teaching, this evolutionary teaching? I have several here that are listed. Number one, human beings are essentially no different than animals or bugs. When you look at that, we essentially have no difference. The fact is that bugs are a little bit more involved than amoebas, and animals are a little bit more involved than bugs, and human beings are a little bit more involved than that. And ultimately, according to evolutionary theory, 1 million years from now, our planet might have a more evolved species, but they may come from the bug or from the animal. Ultimately, we have no intrinsic value that makes us more valuable than an animal or a bug. And so that's where you see sometimes the extreme animal rights people of saying, you shouldn't eat any meat, that's a killing. And well, that's why, because they're thinking that animals have just as much right as humans. There's no intrinsic value. But ultimately, that's not raising up the animals. Ultimately, that's saying that humans, we really don't matter that much. We're just a speck on a speck. We're worthless. We're nothing. Not only are we essentially no different than animals or bugs, but ultimately, when you look at that, that means that humans have no innate rights. We have no rights. When we talk about human rights, what are human rights? Where do they come from? Where do these ideas of any rights that we have as humanity, where does that come from? And we'll have people that will talk about it in college campuses. It's a huge issue now. But ultimately, when we think of human rights, it's a group in charge that says, okay, we want to vote these rights to these group of people. So we can choose to give rights to this group because we're in power, and we can take rights away from this group. Because there's no innate right that anybody has. It's only given or taken away by whoever happens to be in power at that time. But it's not something that's innate. It's simply something that ultimately the survival of the fittest. And because that's what evolution is. It's the use of powers for survival. And that's what you see happening in the use of the idea of human rights now, is that it's something that we talk a lot about, but there's no ultimate source to it other than evolution. Which means that if you take the survival of the fittest, it can be given or it can be taken away. If you take that even a little bit further, you understand that ultimately the whole discussion about abortion flows from this. Because when we have this discussion about abortion, what is abortion? Well, it's basically saying that there's an unborn child who is at the core a less evolved life, and therefore if no humans have rights, especially this less evolved life, has no rights. Now, the language that people usually use to argue for the idea of abortion is really very deceptive. I mean, usually when we hear it, we hear about a woman's rights for self-control, control her own body, reproductive rights. We hear that all the time, right? Now, think about that. If you're logically consistent, we use these words and we don't think about what they mean. They sound great, but they're not true. They're deceptive. Now, I would agree that a woman has rights over her own body. And as part of that right, she can choose to engage or abstain in sexual relationship that might end up in pregnancy. But once she involves in that and she ends up pregnant, it's no longer a question of what she does with her own body. See, the issue is now the question of what does she do to the body that's growing inside of her? Because biologically, there is no question on this issue. Biologically, the baby is not part of the mom's body. It has its own heartbeat. It has its own brain waves. It has its own circulatory system. It often has a very different blood type than the mother's. And so it's a different person. It's not saying, okay, what are you going to do with your own body? No, there's another body growing inside of you. What are you going to do with that? So the question then, is it a person? You see, if evolution is true, and this is ultimately at the core of where we get so much of our disagreement. If evolution is true and people argue for this based on an evolutionary perspective, that person could argue that while biologically the fetus is an unborn person, it's still just a blob of cells. Yes, it's an unborn life, but it's human just because of accident of nature. There's no innate value in its humanity. And since this baby is not yet born, it's lacking self-awareness, which is an important part of life. And so we shouldn't think about twice about end of this life. And ultimately, it is of no difference than a bug. Because both a bug and a baby are ultimately underdeveloped. You have a bug that is underdeveloped in its evolution, and a baby that is underdeveloped in it physically and developmentally. And ultimately, there are lumps of cells that are not yet self-aware. There's no innate difference. And so when you hear this debate, that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a lack of understanding of value of life. From an evolutionary perspective, I can talk to somebody who's pro-abortion. It's hard for me to argue against them if that's what they really believe is true. Now, unfortunately, although they believe that's true, it's not true. Because as we've seen, we are not the product of evolution. We are the product of God's creation. And as being created by God, we are created in the image of God. And we're not just a blob of cells. But part of being created in the image of God is that all beings have a soul. All human beings have a soul. So that even an unborn child that is not yet fully developed biologically still is a human being with a soul, and killing it is murder. And we have to remember this. If we're just the accident of nature, then we have no value. But if we are created by God's design, then we have incredible value. And you have an unborn baby that is one of incredible value that deserves protection. Not taking advantage of it and killing it because it's defenseless. Now, I've got to speak that because that's true, and it's something that we've got to understand in the context of our culture. But saying that, I am sure that I'm positive, because I know the numbers of this. There are people that are here today, there are women here today that have had an abortion. Now, I have to speak the truth about what is involved in this, because it is true, but at the same point in time, I want to say that there's also the opportunity of grace. No matter what you believe, the fact is that if we are created by God, then that is an unborn child that is killed in the womb. And there are numerous people that have done that, and I want to tell you that that's hard to hear. But I want you to hear that if you understand what you've done, and you can come to God, you can say, God, forgive me. Because ultimately, there is no sin that is so great that is beyond God's forgiveness. So when I speak words of truth that might convict, I don't speak them so that you would walk out of here feeling condemned. I speak them so that you would know the truth, so that even as you are convicted, that you would know that there is one that can forgive that sin and take that condemnation on the cross and offer you grace and forgiveness. It not only understands or shapes the view of the debate on abortion, now we have a debate on euthanasia. The right to die, we often hear, but what we're going to see is what is often argued as the right to die soon becomes the responsibility to die. It's argued that, that as people are sick, that we don't want them to die in pain, so we want to have now physician-assisted suicide. At this point, there are a couple states that have approved this. There are 18 states and Washington, D.C. that are currently considering legalizing physician-assisted suicide. And the idea is, we need death with dignity. You need to be able to decide about those things and to be able to escape the pain. Now again, if you believe in the idea of evolution, that is logical and it makes sense. Because there is no innate value in life. There's no, something to say, here you are, and if you lose the value that you have of mobility and dignity, your dignity is in your ability to contribute to the culture, your ability to be happy, but there's no dignity beyond that. So if you lose that dignity, you should just end your life and be able to die with dignity. But if you understand creation, we realize that each person has value instilled by God, and your dignity is not in your health or your ability to perform or contribute to the culture. The person's dignity is who they are as an image bearer of God. And even the sickest, even the most lame, the people that are that are most handicapped, have that dignity, and that dignity should be celebrated. That dignity should be protected. And what we see happen when you study any place that has approved the assisted euthanasia, the right of physician-assisted suicide, and you say it's a right to die, before long you look at that area in 20 years, what starts to happen is you start to say, well, here are these people and they're getting older and they're costing so much money, and we could save the money by speeding it along. Or people are now, given, boy, if I could spend, this could cost all my money if I get all this extra health treatment, and now my kids aren't going to have that wealth, and so if I kill myself now, I can leave more to my kids. And so what starts to happen is the right to die becomes the responsibility to die. It becomes something that after a little while, once you devalue life, suddenly now it's not about, well, you choose to die on your terms. Suddenly it's now, I get to choose when you die on our terms, on society's terms, because there's no value in life. We've already decided that. Now, do you see how important this is? It's an issue that is, again, not just about biology. It's about worldview that shapes our thinking on huge areas of life. And we see these debates going in our culture, and they only make sense if we understand people, if you're thinking from an evolutionary standpoint, that's why they think this is right. That's why they argue these things. But as Christians, we shouldn't buy those arguments, because we know that there's value of life. We know something different, that each person is created in the image of God. The biblical view of humanity is that we are created in God's image. It's what we read a couple moments ago in Genesis chapter 1. What does it say in Genesis 1? It says a whole picture of God created and it was good, and God created it was good, and God spoke and it was good. And then God slows down and he says, okay, let me take extra time here. Because this is not just one of the animals. This is not one of the many things that I've done. He says, this is the culmination. This is special. And in verse 26, and then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps over on all the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female created them. That we are a special act of creation. That we are not like everything else. That we read in Genesis 2 that God breathed the soul into man. An eternal soul, so that we're not just the dirt of the ground, but we have eternity in our being. And what are the implications of this? If we understand that they're huge implications. Number one is that each person has incredible inborn value as an image bearer of God. Each person. See, according to our culture, again, people's value are determined by what you're contributing to the culture, what you're contributing to society. And so certain people have more value, and we celebrate them having greater value because they contribute more. And boy, we start to question if somebody doesn't contribute or actually taking away, do they have value? And what you have here is that each person has incredible value. I know there's a movie coming out about Mother Teresa, and if you want to know her heart, that's what she said. She said each person, she's in the slums of Calcutta, in a culture where people were totally devalued, ministering to people that that were rejected as having any value. And she says, I love each one of them because I'm loving them as I love Christ. Because they have value, because they are created in God's image. See, as we understand that, you understand that creation then destroys all prejudice, favoritism, and racism. That doesn't mean that you can have a Christian who's prejudiced or shows favoritism or racism. Yeah, it does. But it's a Christian who doesn't really understand creation. If we have those things, it's because we don't understand and we're not fully applying the truths of creationism. See, what we realize is that if in our world, again, we judge people by what they contribute. So some people, external traits, maybe a race, and here I value them more, or what they contribute. Well, they're wealthy or they're famous. They have something to contribute to me. But what we learn is if we learn to apply the biblical belief of creation is that each person has incredible value, not based on any external factor of race or any external thing like that, or by what they contribute or what they do. Each one has value because they are image bearers of God. I think James chapter 2 says this so well. James 2, verse 1, "My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby comes in," continues, "and if you pay attention to the one who wears fine clothing and say, 'Sit here in a good place,' and you say to the poor man, 'Stand over there,' or 'Sit down at my feet,' have you not made distinctions amongst yourself and become judges with evil thoughts?" It says, don't judge on external purposes. Now, why? Let's go back to verses 1 and 2. You see it even more there in some of the language that isn't as evident in the English, but it jumps out you in the original. When it says, in verse 2, if a man comes in wearing a gold ring and fine clothing, what it does is it uses a really unusual word for fine clothing. It's the word that's used to describe the angels' robes when they stand before God. Literally, it's shining, glowing. And so if somebody comes in and they're wearing this fine ring and they're glowing, and somebody else comes in with shabby, and it's a very word and there's no glory to them. There's no spark. There's nothing recognizable. So now, don't do that. Why? Look at the very end of verse 1. Because you are believers, you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. Now, why is it that we as Christians should never show any favoritism? Because what happens is that when you have in the world somebody come in and, man, they're stressed and they're shining and they're noticeable, they're famous. Oh, do you see that person? And we're drawn to them because they have glory. And so this other person, they don't have any glory. We don't even notice them. That's what happens in the world. That happens everywhere in the world. But you know what should happen here? Is we've come together to worship our Lord Jesus Christ, the King of glory. And as we are so overwhelmed with Him, as we're overwhelmed with the Lord of glory, we're so overwhelmed with Him. Somebody comes in and the wealthiest, most powerful, famous person in the world comes in, and you're like, man, I barely notice him because I'm so focused on Jesus. Their glory holds nothing to that's just a tiny candle to the Son of Jesus Christ. So there is no purpose that I would give favoritism. But not only that, does that mean that we just treat everybody shabbily? No. Because if I understand that I not only worship the Lord of glory, I realize that each person that I now minister to and interact with are created in the image of the Lord of glory. So I not only look at the Lord of glory and I'm overwhelmed by Him, but then I look at you and I say, you're created in His image. I see a reflection of the glory of Jesus Christ. And again, the incredible glow from the glory of Jesus Christ is so great. Whether you're wearing fine clothes or nothing, the most shabby or whatever your race, no matter what, all those things, you're an image bearer of Christ. Nothing could make you shine brighter, and nothing could dim that shine. You see, that should totally transform the way that we relate to each other. So it totally destroys racism, favoritism. We should be radically different. That we literally have these rights and values that are given by God. They define things. Do you know how significant this is? If you go back in the history of our country, the Declaration of Independence, when it was written, people argued, was America a Christian nation? No, we're not really in a sense, but it was a nation that was established on Christian principles, primarily by people who believed and practiced those principles. And when we started our nation, you know what the foundational truth of the beginning of our nation was? Some of the first lines of the Declaration of Independence that all of us know. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Things that are self-evident, you can't deny. What? That all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Here it's saying, if we are establishing a country, we're establishing in this idea that we know there is a Creator, and this Creator has created every person in the image of God, and each one has an image bearer of God, has rights that cannot be taken away. They are not given by the government. A government cannot give them, a government cannot take them away. When you look at this, if you understand this idea, their rights and values that are given by God, they cannot be given or taken away. They can only be recognized or disregarded. And a good government is going to recognize that. A healthy community is going to recognize that, and they're going to treat people as image bearers of God and saying, each person has value and worth. And we recognize those rights that are given by God, not by the state. A state only recognizes God and the rights that he has given. But the further we get away from that, and the further that we embrace an evolutionary worldview, what happens is suddenly we have no rights, and the government becomes the one who gives and who takes away. See, this is a vitally important issue. It teaches us that you are also, each one of us here are created as a masterpiece of God's design. That when you understand this, it says that when God created, that you are created as a masterpiece. Do you understand what that means? Psalm chapter 1, or Psalm 139, I think says it so well. For you are formed by my inward beings. You knitted me together in my mother's wombs. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intrinsically or intricately woven in the depths of the earth. And here's what he's saying. I have great value because God has given it to me. I am personally designed by God as a culmination of his creation. God is saying to each person here, I designed you the way you are. Are you perfect? No. But you're God's perfect work. And in his masterpiece, any masterpiece that is made, it's going to have dark spots, it's going to have light spots that bring out beauty and glory. And in each one of us, there is a darkness, there's weaknesses, but there are also strengths that bring out his glory, that teach us things. And when we look at this, it's so easy for us to say, well, God messed up here, God messed up here. What God made you, when he made you, he didn't say, whoops, just I forgot about that. Just, meant to put hair on him. He didn't do any of that. No, God said, this is exactly, he created us, and he said, it is good. And what happens when we come back and we say, well, God didn't do, I'm not valuable, God didn't really do, I don't have anything to offer. What we're doing is we're not being humble, we're being proud. We're saying, I know better than God. God says that you're valuable. God says that I made you the way that I designed you. God said that I'm proud of my creation, that you are my masterpiece. I want to use you, I want to know you, I want to love you. And if you say, well, I'm nothing, you're saying, I know better than God. Saying my opinion about me is more accurate than God's opinion. No, God has created each one of us. He is an artist, and he has poured his worth, he has poured his truth, he is into his artwork, his greatest work of art. And see, that's not conceit, because that's not in who you are in yourself. You're not a self-made person. That's putting glory towards God. And accepting anything less is actually taking away from glory from God. It's when you criticize his artwork, you're criticizing the artist. Last of all, if you have any question about that, our ultimate worth is demonstrated by Jesus' death on the cross. You want to know how important, how valuable you are? Here you have the artist that said, I created you perfectly just the way you are, but then you wandered away, you sinned against me, but you're so valuable, I'm willing to pay the ultimate price to call you back, to seek a relationship with you. Now we think in religion it's, we're valuable if we perform, if we earn God's favor, if we've done the right things. No, the gospel isn't about what you do. It's about what Jesus Christ has done. Romans chapter 5, for while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. When did God love you? When you had it together? And when you're weak. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though for perhaps a good person one would dare to die. In the world, people might say, if you earn it, you get it. But here's what God showed his love for us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's the ultimate demonstration of value. See, in our experience, value is something that is earned. That's religion, that you earn God's favor, you earn God's value. And in our experience, if we perform, people like us, we're valuable. If we don't, we're not. See, and I know there are people that are here today, and you're sitting there saying, man, if somebody really knew who I was, if somebody knew the real me, if somebody knew my story, if somebody knew my failings, if somebody knew my history, they wouldn't want me here. God wouldn't want me here. Do you see it saying? No, God says, while you were still a sinner. God knows you. And God says, I know you, and I brought you here, and I want you to have the reality that you say that because I knew you while you were rejecting me, I saw you so valuable that I died for you. And now I want a relationship with you. I want to know you. You're not here to say, okay, get it all together and then I'll accept you. No, here's what the terms of the relationship is. Admit that you don't have it all together. Admit that you're a sinner, that you need to be died for. Admit and acknowledge that not only have you failed God, but that God still loves you and sees you so incredibly valuable that he sent his son Jesus Christ to die for you. And you say, God, I agree with you with that, and I ask you to forgive my sins. And when he does so, it's not our performance, it's Jesus' performance. God takes our sins and he takes it off and he puts it on Jesus, and he gives us Jesus' righteousness. And he says, now I've made you who you were always meant to be. You are now made righteous. You are now made holy. Your sins are forgiven. All the things that you want to hide are taken care of in Jesus Christ. You're now made holy not by your performance, but by your acceptance of what Jesus Christ has done for you. Have you ever accepted him as your Lord and Savior? Have you ever trusted in him? If you're here today and if you haven't done that, and you're trying to fake it, or you're trying to hide, do you understand that no, this is a story about God created in his image, and he wants a relationship with you of incredible value. Not after you fix yourself up, or not if you hide yourself well enough. You're valuable to where you are so much that Jesus Christ died for you. And are you willing to now accept that and ask him to do his work of grace, accept his grace of forgiveness? I'm going to pray, and we're going to have a chance to serve communion. And in many ways, we're celebrating just where we're ending here. You are so valued that Jesus Christ died for you. And this is a remembrance of what he has done, but it's also a call of saying, okay, how do we respond to that?